I'd better make it clear from the outset, I don't claim to be the author of this book, because it's really Shankara. There's a mere process of translation which has gone on. But the interesting thing is, it would be interesting to ask how many people here in the audience have actually bought this book? Come on, own up. Good, a good number. All right, how many people have actually read it? Very good. How many people have understood it? That's the real question, of course, because we can buy books, we can read them, but have we understood them? And this is one of the essential disciplines of advaitavedanta. We hear something, we then reflect on it. We actually use the mind to reflect on it. It's called mananam in Sanskrit. And then, hopefully, some of that actually seeps into our being, actually becomes part of our being. It's really known for what it is. And so I hope this evening that some of the contents of this book will actually become part of ourselves. And I'd like to start with a very simple reflection. The body is consciousness alone. The world's, everything you can see in front of you, is consciousness alone. The elements, all the elements which make up this creation, earth, water, fire, air, ether, are consciousness alone. The senses, the hearing, that by which one hears right now is only consciousness. The seeing which is going on now is only consciousness. The touching, the tasting, the smelling is only consciousness. Well, those are the organs of perception, but of course there are the organs of action. Handling is consciousness. Moving with the feet is consciousness. Speaking is only consciousness. Procreating is only consciousness. Evacuation is only consciousness. All aspects of life are only consciousness. They're nothing but consciousness. And ruling over all of this is the mind, and the mind is only consciousness. The doer. The person who thinks he does something. If you think you do something, that doer is only consciousness. The moving mind is consciousness. The intellect is only consciousness. The heart, the emotions, are only consciousness. And the personality, the ego, is only consciousness. Truth is only consciousness. The supreme aim of a human being is only consciousness. This is verse 19 of the text. And I thought we'd start with it because the sense here is if what that is understood, the whole of the text becomes very easy. But there's one other key to this, and this might be new to us. It certainly was new to me. I had great difficulty translating these verses because I just didn't understand them. I hadn't come across this teaching before. This consciousness reflects in two places. It reflects in the mind. You can see it now reflecting in the mind. And it reflects everywhere. And you can see it reflecting everywhere. But it's because of these two places of reflection that the world of duality appears to occur. So this is rather important for non-duality, that the process of how duality occurs is understood. And this is precisely the key that this text gives us. But, I warn you, it can take a long time for the penny to drop. So listen carefully, because this requires acute attention. Well, I'm going to speak about the whole text and take you through the journey, if you like, which the text takes us through, because the more I've just been looking at this the last fortnight or so, and I hadn't realized how beautifully structured this work is. It is a systematic way of coming to advaita. And really, this is all you need for self-realization. This will do it. It's a complete system. It's a conversation between a pupil and a teacher. And the pupil is not a beginner in philosophy. I would say the pupil has been at it for quite a while. He says, I know there is only the non-dual self, but, he says, the world of duality and division still appears to exist for me. But he speaks about the observer of the mind. And this observer is obviously very important for the disciple. And he says that through discrimination, he can overcome the attachments and he can realize the non-dual self. He says that the universe, which he is observing, must have been created through ignorance. But he is that non-dual self, but he still has a slight problem that although he's got that in theory, obviously he hasn't quite realized it because he's still seeing this world of duality. So this is his problem. So he appeals to his teacher and asks his teacher to destroy the doubt he has about non-duality. And the teacher certainly does this in the very first verse. He gives it to him straight between the eyes. The teacher says, there is no ignorance. There is no reason. There is no universe. And there is no witnessing. So, everything we seem to have learnt in philosophy seems to now be out the window. And the reason, of course, why there are none of these things is because they are only consciousness. Now, what I hadn't realized until recently is that there is a system in this text for those who have started to study it. You'll notice that, first of all, the teacher starts by saying to the disciple, you are that consciousness. You are that. And then there's a shift. And the teacher starts saying, I am the consciousness. I am that. So we have, you are that, and I am the absolute. Of course, these are the two great statements in Advaitavedanta. You are that. I am absolute. And for those who have been coming to the annual lecture for the last 2 years, you will realise those were the titles of the 2 lectures. You are that was 2 years ago. I am absolute was 1 year ago. And so now it's rather convenient. We are continuing on from that, and we will take a further step, which the text takes us through. The teacher starts with a warning about the senses. I don't know about you, but one can have the idea that there's someone sitting over there and I'm over here. You ever got that feeling? This, of course, is the duality, the apparent duality. But the reason why that happens is, of course, because of the senses. I see something else. I taste something else. I touch something else. I hear something else. I smell something else. So you're hearing, touching, tasting, smelling something different, an object of the senses. And so the first discipline, if you like, the first call is to be free of this deception of the senses. I know people like stories, so I have got a few stories up my sleeve this evening, and there's a good story from the tradition which illustrates this very well. It's not in the text, but it illustrates very well the problem with the senses. There was a beautiful lady called Ahalya. It is said that the Creator took the very finest aspects of the female form and embodied those aspects in Ahalya. She was extremely attractive. She was married to a rather elderly sage called Gautama, and they lived in a hermitage, practicing austerities. Now, it just so happened that Indra, and Indra represents the senses, Indra happened to see Ahalya and was rather attracted to Ahalya and watched for an opportunity. He waited till Gautama one day left the hermitage. Gautama had to go off for some business, leaving Ahalya alone. And so Indra took his opportunity. He went and visited Ahalya when Gautama was away. Ahalya welcomed Indra in. She too was very attracted to Indra. Indra stayed the night. And in the morning, Ahalya said to Indra, "You better go quickly. Gautama will be back." But it was too late. Gautama was coming in and saw the couple together. He cursed Ahalya and he cursed Indra. He cursed Ahalya that she would be born as a stone. He cursed Indra that he would be covered all over his body with 1,000 eyes. So, we have the same problem as Ahalya. We have, as it were, an illicit affair with the senses, with Indra. And because of this illicit affair with the senses, we have this too solid flesh. We've been turned, as it were, into stone. But there is one saving grace. Gautama said, when Rama comes along and touches the stone which you will become with his feet, you will be freed. You will be released from that form. And that's precisely the same with us. The Rama is the consciousness. And when that Rama comes and touches us, we are freed from this too solid flesh, as Hamlet puts it. Of course, occasionally, perforce, we get an event where suddenly we are woken up out of the realm of the senses, out of this attachment to the body. There are a couple of times where this has happened to me. I was travelling along a so-called motorway in Ireland. This was before they improved all the roads. And we were travelling at a fair speed. And unfortunately, a car drove out right in front of us. It was a driver from New York who obviously was looking in the wrong direction. I think he had just hired a car. And all one could do was watch as we approached the side of the car at some speed. It was evident that it was going to be a bit dicey as to whether this particular body was going to survive or not, because we were impacting at some rate. Suddenly, I was not this body. Suddenly, there was just the consciousness. There was the event taking place, but there was only consciousness. And you were freed from this solid flesh. But the good news is there are methods for achieving this detachment which are less radical. And this book, Self-Illumination, is the key. The book starts, the advice first given to the pupil takes the form of a series of analogies. I was studying this book when I was in Florida recently, over Easter. I think my wife's tutor at college said to my wife that Sanskritists don't go to Florida. But in our case, we do go to Florida. And it's quite a philosophical place, actually. The self is everywhere. And one thing you notice, of course, in Florida is that because it's so warm, as you're driving along, in the distance, you seem to see water on the road. Of course, there isn't water on the road, it's an optical illusion. But this same optical illusion is spoken of in this text. Water appears in desert sands, but in fact there are only desert sands. Here, for example, in this church, we may think there are many bodies. But in fact there is only consciousness, just as in the desert there are only desert sands. I spent many hours just sitting by the sea, and I watched the waves as they pounded into the shore. There were different types of waves. There were bubbles, there was foam, but of course it was only water. And it's just like that, says this text, with this creation. We get the different types of waves. We get the different bubbles, the foam, the different types of experience we have, the vast range of experience, the vast range of beings are like the foam and bubbles in the sea. But it's all only water. It's all only consciousness. And my favorite analogy, I must admit, I have a soft spot for key lime pie, which is a speciality in Florida. And as I was biting into the key lime pie, I noticed that the sweetness is right the way through the pie. And this analogy is also used in self-illumination. Take a cake, and the sugar is right the way through the cake. There is no place of the cake where it is not. I'm told by my scientific friends that this is because sugar molecules, they dissolve, and of course they get everywhere. But it's like that with this absolute being. It is everywhere. The bliss is everywhere, just as the sweetness of the cake is everywhere in the cake. All you are seeing now, all you are experiencing now is only sat, being, chit, consciousness, and ananda, bliss. This church is full of it. This whole creation is full of it. There is nowhere in this creation where this bliss is not found. Just as there is nowhere in that cake where the sweetness is not found. Well, we're up to verse 26, and there's a rather surprising verse. Having said that everything is consciousness, it then says that the senses, mind, life breaths, and personality all work together to abandon association with the inert. Now, in some contexts, we have regarded, for example, personality, the ego. We have regarded that as something in the way. We have regarded the mind as something in the way. We have regarded the senses as something in the way. I even spoke about it just now. But no, now we're told in verse 26 that these working together may abandon association with the inert. How? When they are immersed in chit, when they are immersed in consciousness. And at any moment we can immerse the personality, we can immerse the life force, we can immerse the mind, we can immerse all our faculties in chit, in consciousness. Hear, O Israel, the Lord thy God is one Lord, and thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. It's the same message. All these faculties work together. This is the play of waking up. The teacher goes on and he says, he's now really proclaiming his own realization. He says that just as clouds never touch the sky, so the miseries of the world never touch me. He goes through the different realms, the physical. He says there may be a body made up of flesh, bones, feces, and so on, but I am not that. There may be a subtle body, and the text goes into quite a description of the subtle body. It's rather fascinating. There are these arteries or nerves called nadi, 72,000 of them apparently, and they emanate from the heart, and they contain coloured serums. And these coloured serums are the colourings of the subtle body. They make up the nature of the subtle body, the type of subtle body which an individual or even a nation or any community may have. And this subtle body creates our response to things, it creates the environment we're in, it creates our body. Everything about us is created through these veins, these subtle nerves, nadi as they're called. But of course all this is emanating from the causal world. The teacher says he's not the subtle world. The subtle world is nothing to do with him. But also he is not the causal world. And in this verse, it names 3 particular qualities of the causal world, possible qualities. Dullness. Ever come across that? Dullness, inertness, affection, pleasure. These are causal aspects which then appear in the mind in different forms. All right. We're now prepared for the main meal, as it were, the main teaching of this text. And we're introduced to 2 concepts. The Jeewa, which is translated normally as the individual soul. It means that which gives life to something. So a body without the Jeewa is a corpse, but with the Jeewa, with that animating aspect, it is enlivened. It's the individual soul. And also, we are introduced to what's called the Ishwara. Ish is the root, the Sanskrit root, to have supreme lordship. The Wara bit means having the nature of. So Ishwara has the nature of supreme lordship. And we've translated it in this text as the Lord, because it rules over this creation, often said to be synonymous with the Creator. So we have the Jeewa, the individual soul, and we have the Lord. That is the great powers of nature, physical, subtle, causal, the lot. It's the environment in which the Jeewa exists. And these 2 play off each other. But here's the interesting thing. The Jeewa is compared to space contained in a pot, quite limited. The Ishwara is compared to space in a house, also actually limited, much larger than the pot, but nevertheless limited. Both these are said to be illusory. One other event from Florida. I was persuaded by my wife to play crazy golf. I don't know if you've ever been to Florida, but they have these amazing crazy golf places. And we had 8, I really enjoyed it actually, I must say. We had 8, I won, so. We had 18 holes, and the great thing about this, it was safari golf. So we went around from hole to hole, and in every hole there was an image of some animal. This was why it was safari golf. And we got to a place where there was this huge image of a gorilla. And my wife said, "Oh, I want to pose in front of that gorilla. Please take a photograph." So I thought this was pretty harmless. I took this photograph of my wife in front of this gorilla, took the photograph and thought no more of it. Until we got back to our hotel room and I saw her putting this photograph on Instagram. With the image, remember it's a picture of my wife in front of a gorilla, the image was being put out on Instagram and the caption was, "What's happened to Warwick?" And this occurred to me that this was a good lesson, that the Jeewa is rather changeable. We don't know what's going to happen to the Jeewa next. It can take any turn, depending upon action, depending upon desire. The Jeewa is a rather movable feast. But, according to this teaching, the Ishwara is also a movable feast. It's continually developing, changing. And of course, the Jeewa gets devoted to various forms of the Ishwara. I see this devotion going on near the flat where we live. We live very near Chelsea football ground. And you can see the devotees every Saturday afternoon, dressed in blue, going to worship at the stadium. Blue is the colour, football is the game. We're all together, and winning is our aim. And of course, this is in different forms. People do this in different ways. Some people are devoted to houses, some people to families, some people to ideologies. But we all have our different Ishwaras. And there's this relationship between the Jeewa and the Ishwara. But it's this relationship which this text is pointing out, which is the illusory aspect which creates this world of division. A few more stories might help. I'm reading a version of the Ramayana at the moment, which is the spiritual Ramayana. And I think you probably know the story that Sita is taken away by the demon king Ravana. In most versions, this is pretty straightforward, but in the particular version I'm reading, Rama has a little meeting with Sita before Ravana, the demon king, comes along to take her away. And Rama says to his wife Sita, "Sita, make yourself invisible. Create a magical Sita. Let the magical Sita be taken away." And this she does. She makes herself invisible. And it's the magical Sita that's taken away by Ravana. It's the magical Sita that goes through all these vicissitudes, ups and downs, trials and tribulations, being taken off, tormented by demonesses, and finally recovered. But the Jeewa is like the magical Sita. The Jeewa goes through all sorts of different trials and tribulations, adventures, ups and downs. And it's good to remember this. The Jeewa is only a magical Jeewa, and this text makes this clear. Your true self is, as it were, invisible. What about the Ishwara? Bit more tricky. Of course, the Ishwara tends to think it is the bees and E's, as it were, the big cheese of the universe. And there are stories about this. Krishna, as a boy, has an encounter with Brahma, the creator, who's the same as the Ishwara. Once, Krishna had a picnic with his friends, the cowherd boys. And there they were, and they were looking after some calves. And the calves were wandering away a little bit when they were having a picnic. And Brahma, the creator, decided to test Krishna. So he hid away the calves, put them on clouds. Then, when Krishna's back was turned, he hid away his friends, put them off on clouds as well. Krishna was a little concerned because, of course, he was rather concerned that the mothers would be rather distraught when their children didn't return that evening. And furthermore, the cows would also be upset when their calves didn't return. So, out of compassion for them, he created, out of his own consciousness, new calves, new cowherd boys, which were identical to the originals. But with one big difference. The new calves, the new cowherd boys, were full of bliss because they were made only of Krishna's consciousness. And so when the boys went back to the mothers, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see you. Oh, you're not being naughty anymore and you're full of bliss." And the cows also were very, very pleased. "Moo, moo, moo, moo," they said. How wonderful, in cow language. How wonderful that my calves are so full of bliss. So for a year, the cows and the mothers enjoyed the bliss of Krishna's consciousness. They saw their own offspring as only bliss. And of course, there's a message in this for us. All that you see is only bliss. It's only made of Krishna's consciousness. But at this point, Brahma sees what Krishna has done and realizes that Krishna is the real being behind this universe, and that he, Brahma, the creator, Ishwara, is only an appearance within that creation. And Krishna shows Brahma that there are thousands of Brahma. There are thousands of creators ruling over thousands of creations. So the Ishwara is also limited, is also finite. And at this point, the text tries to establish, where is this Jeewa? Who can pin it down? And it analyzes the Jeewa as consciousness reflecting in the mind. So you have three aspects. You have the consciousness, you have the mind, and the reflection of the consciousness in the mind. And these three together, in ignorance, give us the appearance of the Jeewa. Test it out now. Be aware of the consciousness and watch the reflection of this consciousness in the mind. With the consciousness, the mind, and the reflection of consciousness together, you appear to have the Jeewa, the individual soul. But it's only an appearance. Because if you analyze it, where is that Jeewa actually? It can't be just the consciousness, because the Jeewa, as we've discussed, like the gorilla, is changing. A reflection is a reflection. It's nothing substantial. See your reflection in the mirror, smash the mirror, there's no more reflection, so reflection isn't really anything. And the mind? Well, the mind is inanimate. Its only real life is consciousness. So the Jeewa doesn't exist in any of those three. It's only when in ignorance they come together, there appears to be a Jeewa. But the Jeewa, as this text says, is fabricated, illusory. It's not really there. But more shocking, the Ishwara is not really there, says the text. Why? Again, it's just the same thing on a universal level, not an individual level. You get the pure consciousness, reflecting this time not in just the mind, but in the great illusion, the Maya. That's the reflector. Watch it now. Be aware of the consciousness. See the Maya in this church. And you can see the consciousness reflecting in the Maya. This is the Ishwara when these three come together. This is the Lord, as we've translated it. It's impossible to translate, really. But it's a lordly being. Where is this Ishwara? It can't be the consciousness, because as we've discussed, these creators, they come and they go. They're changeable. So where is this Ishwara? It's not in the reflection, as we discussed. Reflection's just a reflection. It's not really there. And the Maya, well, that's inanimate. Its only life is consciousness. So in the end, when we analyze it, the Ishwara is very difficult to pin down, rather like the Jeewa, the individual soul. These two, the individual soul and this lordly being, are imagined, fabricated. So what's the use of this? Try it in practice. Observe the Jeewa, or what appears to be the Jeewa. Observe the Ishwara, what appears to be the Ishwara. But remember that in reality, there is only consciousness behind these appearances. But because we invest in the reality of the Jeewa, we think I'm an individual moving around in this creation. We think there is a creation. We think there is an individual. We think I'm interacting with that creation. And this is the story of our life. But it's a life of duality. And this text is inviting us to go beyond that duality, to realize the consciousness beyond the appearances. It's inviting us to go behind the scenes. One more story. How are we doing for time? Yes, we've got time for at least one more story, I think. There is a character in the Mahabharata who's rather important in this regard. There was a king called Brihadrata. Brihadrata had 2 wives. He had a problem, however. Big problem for a king. He had no children. 2 wives, but no children. And he was getting a bit desperate. He needed a successor. So he went to a sage, a wise person. And he said, I've got this problem, got 2 wives, but unfortunately no children. Can you help me, please? Just so happened that this sage was sitting underneath a mango tree. Mango fell down and fell on the head of the king, Brihadrata. Oh, said the sage, take the mango, give it to your wives. Fine, said King Brihadrata. He took the mango home, cut the mango in half, gave 1 half to one wife, 1 half to the other. And of course, they both became pregnant. Wonderful, thought Brihadrata. 2 children. Unfortunately, of course, when the wives gave birth, the first wife gave birth to half a body. 1 leg, a left arm, left side of the face, 1 ear, 1 eye, half a nose, half a mouth. Second wife gave birth to the right-hand side of the body. Right leg, right arm, right-hand side of the body, right ear, right eye. Brihadrata was appalled. So were the queens. Throw out these 2 half-bodies straight away. Throw them out into the forest behind the palace, said the king. What have we done to deserve this? And the 2 half-bodies, lifeless half-bodies, were thrown out into the forest behind the palace. Well, it just so happened that prowling around in the forest where these 2 half-bodies were thrown, there was a flesh-eating demoness called Jara. And Jara was rather fond of human flesh, and she smelt a meal. I can smell human flesh. Ha ha! Wonderful, thought Jeewa. She took up the two half-bodies and just so happened that they clapped together, forming one strong body. This was Jarasandha, he who is put together by the demoness Jeewa. And she was so shocked, she thought, oh, this must be the king's son. I will take it into the palace. And she presented the king Brihadrata with his son. And this Jarasandha grew up to be a great warrior. And towards the end of the Mahabharata, this is where this story is from, Jarasandha picks a fight with Bhima. Not the sort of person you'd normally pick a fight with, because Bhima had the strength of 1,000 elephants. But anyway, he did pick a fight with Bhima. And oh, what a fight it was. It was a wrestling match, lasted for 13 days and nights. They didn't stop. No food, no water. It was the most terrible conflict. And on the 14th day, it appeared as though, unfortunately, Jarasandha was getting the upper hand. But it just so happened that Krishna was there. And Krishna knew of the fatal fault line which was down the body of Jarasandha. He smiled. And just as Bhima was looking over in desperation at him, he took a leaf, tore it in two, and threw the parts asunder. Bhima took the hint, pulled the body of Jarasandha apart, and threw the two halves of Jarasandha's body asunder. We too have this fatal fault line right down the body. The fault line is thinking, I'm over here and you're over there. This is the duality, the fatal duality which we all have. Well, after introducing this teaching of the Jeewa and the Ishwara and their illusory nature, there comes about in the text the silent realization. And this is precisely what happens when one realizes this unreal Jeewa and this unreal Ishwara. You need both together. It's no use just thinking, oh, the individual soul is illusory. You also simultaneously need to realize that the Ishwara is illusory. Otherwise, it's only half a job. The text emphasizes that these two, the Jeewa and the Ishwara, are illusory. And when we go beyond these appearances of the Jeewa, the individual soul, and the Ishwara, the great universe all around the soul, that appearance of the greater universe, then we enter, as it were, this silent realization. And these are perhaps the most famous verses of this text. When I first explored the internet, looking actually for a translation of this text, I came across these three verses of the silent realization. They're so beautiful, I would like to recite them. Satyachid ghanam anantamadvayam sarvadrishya rahitang niramayam yat padam vimalamadvayam shivam tat sadaham iti maunamashraye purnamadvayam akhanda chetanam vishvabheda kalanadi varjitam advitiya parasamvidangshakam tat sadaham iti maunamashraye janma mrityu sukha dukkha varjitam jati niti kula gotra duragam chitvivarta jagatosya karanam tat sadaham iti maunamashraye. I rest in the silent realization that I am ever that taintless, non-dual, auspicious abode which is nothing but truth and consciousness, limitless and unique, free from disease and from all things visible. I rest in the silent realization that I am ever that complete, non-dual, partless consciousness, free from the myriad divisions and doings of the universe, the supreme knowledge that has no second. I rest in the silent realization that I am ever the cause of the world, which is the unreal transformation of consciousness, free from birth and death, free from pleasure and pain, transcending race, conduct, family, and lineage. So this is the silent realization. And now there occurs within the text a festival, if you like, of light, a celebration of light, with many different verses referring to this prakasha. This is the swatma prakashika. It means the prakashika, the lighting up of swatma, one's own self. And light is presented in different ways. There's some beautiful verses. For example, it says that an owl appears to shut off its eyes in the light. I think this is because the owl's eyes are so large. I don't know if you've ever seen an owl close up, but it's the most extraordinary sight. The eyes are so large because, of course, they need to see it in the dark. But in the light, because the eyes are so large, they have to close their eyelids. So it seems as though owls in the daytime are asleep. And this text says that just as owls in the daytime appear to be asleep, so fools sleep in this daylight of bliss and consciousness. Then it says that just as a tiny candle, the smallest candle flickering light can light up a dark room, so a tiny piece of knowledge can dispel great ignorance. And I always think, whenever you attend a lecture or some kind of philosophical session, just a tiny realization will dispel great darkness. You only need a tiny realization. There might be just one thing this evening that might take your attention, but that tiny realization can dispel great ignorance. Then it says, the wise do not accept that there is darkness in the sun. I was rather interested to hear that they're sending a probe into the sun. I don't think they're going to find much darkness there. And this text says that the wise do not accept that there is darkness in the sun. Just as the spiritually wise do not accept that there is any darkness in this world. It is full of light. For the wise, there is no waking, there is no dream, there is no deep sleep. It's all consciousness. There is no old age, there is no youth, there is no childhood. You are only consciousness. There is no home, there is no destination. You may think, after this lecture, you will go home. But is the consciousness at home any different from the consciousness here? There is no home. There is no destination. We think we fly to different countries, maybe on holiday, but is the consciousness different there to here? Home and destination are again imagined. Old age, youth, and childhood are imagined. Waking, dream, deep sleep, these three states we continually pass through, are imagined. All this, the final verse says, depends upon vichara. Vichara means moving around in the mind, which is rather surprising, first of all. All verbs of motion in Sanskrit can refer to the subtle world, and vichara is where you move around in the mind in the sense of inquiring. And this text is an attempt at this vichara, at this inquiry. It speaks of the ocean of inquiry regarding reality. And you may say, well, I thought this was the annual language lecture. I came here to hear about language. Well, I hope you have been hearing about language, because this is the supreme use of language, this vichara. We've been using the English language, but of course this text uses the Sanskrit language, and it's only by grace of that Sanskrit language that we have this text here. I thoroughly recommend studying it in the original, but step by step. The important thing is the vichara, this inquiry. And the last verse speaks about vijnana, not just jhana. Jhana is knowledge. Vijnana is knowledge in practice. We can talk in lectures like this till we're blue in the face. We can have all sorts of theories. We can come to philosophy groups and talk and talk. That might be the jhana, the knowledge, but the vijnana is this knowledge in practice, where it's no longer a theory, but we know this teaching for ourselves. So this is the challenge which this text lays down.
You said like Jeewa and Ishwara. So we've often heard Atman and Paramatman. So is there any difference, or is it just the same?
I think your question
Jeewa.
really was whether there is a difference between the Ishwara and the Atman. Is that right? Yeah. Shankara, the original Shankara, Adi Shankara, tends to use these two terms, Ishwara, meaning the Lord, and Paramatman, meaning the Supreme Self, as the same. So in the very early Advaita tradition, sometimes these terms were used synonymously. However, there's a very important verse in the Mandukya Upanishad. This is the 6th verse of the Mandukya Upanishad. It says, Esha Sarveshwara. This is the Supreme Ishwara of everything, the Lord of all. And it makes it clear in that text that this Sarveshwara is only an appearance, because the next verse goes on to speak about the supreme consciousness, which can't be described and is non-dual. So even there in the Upanishads, this philosophy of the Ishwara being something which is actually passing, the causal world, if you like, the creator of this universe, it's all-knowing, Esha Sarveshwara, Esha Sarvaja, it knows everything, Eshantaryami, it's the inner controller, Esha Yoni, it's the source of all creation, it says. But this Lord is not the same as the consciousness. And the later Advaita texts begin to bring out this teaching even more. And just from the experience of the last few years, really working with this text, you begin to see what it's speaking about. Of course, the important thing is that the Jeewa and the Ishwara, the individual soul and this Lord, are simultaneously imagined. You don't get one without the other. The Jeewa has to have a creation in which to exist. The Ishwara needs the Jeewa for it to be experienced. But this is only a game we're playing. What this text does, it exposes this game, that it is only a game. It's a wonderful game. It's full of consciousness. It's full of bliss. But it's a game. Once you realize it's a game, the whole universe transforms into bliss. You realize there is only the consciousness. That's the way this teaching is going. So, yes, in some texts you'll see Ishwara as being used synonymously with Atman, but in this context, a clear distinction is being made for the purpose of this particular teaching. And you have to understand, no teaching is set in stone. This is an attempt at understanding reality. No one's saying, this is the ultimate truth, this is the only way to see it. This is vichara. It's an investigation. We're not about dogma here, we're about investigation, inquiry. And the inquiry is live.
I feel like that response you just gave there at the end, to some extent answers this question, but presumably if you had no knowledge of the text or kind of vijnana, practical knowledge of the philosophy, it would be very difficult to translate this in a meaningful way. So to what extent do you feel like this translation is a reflection of where you're at, as it were, in your own journey, in your own understanding? Did you get a sense of that as you translated it? And would we get a sense of that in reading it?
Yeah. I think it's a reflection of where we're at. These things don't happen by chance. I was faced with this text, having translated the teaching of reality. This came up very strongly. A friend presented it to me and said she thought that it needed to be translated. And so it was translated. But it is interesting that Sri Vasudevananda Saraswati very recently has spoken on this very topic of the Jeewa and the Ishwara, and as both, in fact, being not the ultimate. So at the same time we've come across this, our teacher, Sri Vasudevananda Saraswati, also simultaneously presented us with this teaching. But what I would say is, the more you have contact with the words, particularly the words of the original, the more you steep yourself in them, the more you enter the world of these great men who composed these texts. And when you first come across a text, you don't quite know where it's come from, and you're floundering a bit. But the more attention you give it, the more it opens up. And even in the last fortnight, I have been amazed at what has come out of this text. And yes, the more you steep yourself in it, the more you will live in this world. I would say that for the 30, 40 odd years I've been following philosophy, consciousness has been an idea, but more and more it's a reality. More and more, I'm not fooled by the doings of the Jeewa. More and more, you realize it's the consciousness which is the real thing. Of course, there are the doings of the Jeewa and there are the doings of the Ishwara, both simultaneously. So yes, it's a practical realization, and if it's not a practical realization, it's not worth anything. So I would say, steep yourself in the text. I know many people have, and this is the kind of text that you need to keep revisiting. Take a verse at a time. Last week, I decided to reflect for an hour a day, and I took one verse every 5 minutes. And so I would spend 1 hour reflecting on 12 verses, just as a systematic thing, and it was most remarkable what came out of it. So this is the shravanam, the hearing of the text, the mananam, the reflecting on the text, and nididhyasanam, as it said, the profound reflection where it becomes part of one's being. Has that answered your question?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, another question at the front here.
I have a very short question. How old is the original text?
I don't know. That's the answer. It's very difficult to say because this is attributed to Adi Shankara. I was getting some advice from a teacher in India, and I got the message back that he thought it wasn't by Adi Shankara, but probably by a later Shankaracharya. And I think there's quite a lot of evidence that this is a result of the later part of the Advaita tradition. But that doesn't in any way invalidate it. Far from it.
No, I would say the older it was, the more valid it was. So it's not in my question, there was no hint that if it is very old, it's out of date. On the contrary, it means to say that actually the study of consciousness and the essence of our being part of it and being it goes forever.
Absolutely.
That's how I understand it.
Yes, it really doesn't, as you say, it doesn't make any difference whether it's an old text or a new text. The Advaita tradition is now. We are part of the Advaita tradition.
And can I ask you, how did you acquire your knowledge of Sanskrit? I'm a translator as well, and I'm a linguist. Right. And, hearing you chant, because it wasn't really reciting, it was like chanting, it was just amazing, it was hypnotic. I mean, I can hardly imagine how a person of, I think you are European, could acquire that type of, grasp on that language. So it's just a curiosity, if I may ask this question.
Yes. I actually came across it at school because it was in the 1970s, or even in the 1960s I came across it actually. There were teachers at my school who were very interested in Sanskrit, and they started teaching me. Even my mother was somewhat interested in yoga, so I think I had come across it very early on. Right. Then I got interested in it in my later teens, and I joined the school here, and I was directed, I heard what Sri Shantananda Saraswati said about the study of Sanskrit, how important it was for philosophy. And
so what came first, philosophy or Sanskrit? Or did they come together?
Both together, really. I would say both together. Obviously, what I would say is there's no point in just studying Sanskrit by itself, except as an intellectual interest. Okay, we can be interested in all sorts of things intellectually, but personally, the reason why I was really attracted to Sanskrit was because of what I saw written in Sanskrit. I came across beautiful prayers, but it wasn't just the prayers themselves, it wasn't just the translations, it was the sound of the language which attracted me. There was something about the language itself, intrinsically, which was completely something I hadn't heard before. It was something totally inspirational, coming from a different source, a different level of humanity. And I thought, well, I should devote my life to this because this is something really worthwhile. So that decision was taken at age 16, and so that's how it happened, and I went off to university and studied it, and India for a time, and so on. Okay. So that's how it all happened.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I think time for just one more question. There's a gentleman.
You alluded to the fact that we are in essence Satchitanand, which is absolute truth, absolute consciousness and absolute bliss. However, why are we not born self-realized? Why is it still a struggle every day to be in the, even with the efforts of the school in teaching us discipline, constant effort, faith, good company, selflessness, and trying to live in the present moment, it is still a struggle. Could you offer any advice as to how to achieve Satchidananda in reality?
I'm going to speak from this text. There is no problem. You are the consciousness. The appearance of not being the consciousness is just a fleeting illusion. It's because we appear to indulge in this illusory Jeewa and this illusory Ishwara that we get this duality and seeming misery and so on appearing. But it's wafer thin. It's not really there. The best advice I can give you is to buy a book as you leave. If you've not got a copy already, perhaps you do. If you haven't got the book, first of all, buy it. Second step, open it. Third step, reflect on it. Deeply. And really that's the best advice I can give, because standing here now, this is the best thing I've come across. It will work. And it will give you confidence that you are the Sat Chit Ananda. It will destroy the doubt. This is what the pupil says. Please destroy this doubt. And the teacher does destroy it. But you have to listen to what he says. You have to reflect on what he says. You have to make it your own. Don't rely on other people's realization. It's your realization which is important. Aparoksha, as it says in the last verse, not from the eye of someone else. It has to be known for yourself. But all this is a play. Really, you are that consciousness, and it's best to start there. And the rest becomes easy.